We pause this programming during our regularly scheduled airtime to bring you a Lumpen radio special. The following broadcast may feature a range of conversations, interviews, performances, and more. Please remain seated and enjoy the show.
WLPN LP Chicago 105.5 FM, Lumpen Radio. Welcome to another Lumpen Radio special. My name is Stephanie Manriquez, and in today's radio show, we have our guest, Rachel Yoon from Northwestern University, investigative journalism student. We also have Josh McGhee, MindSite News Chicago Bureau Chief. For over 2 years, Northwestern University students in the Medill Investigative Lab Chicago have been investigating how police respond to mental health crises, often with traumatic and unnecessary force. The students have also been chronicling solutions where clinicians and counselors respond instead of police in cities around the country, including Chicago, where this program is called CARE. It grew out of the years-long campaign for treatment, not trauma. The Chicago investigative journalist who focuses on the intersections of mental health and the criminal justice system. In January, the team published a national-wide investigation showing police are much more likely to use force on Black people experiencing mental health crisis. Students journalist Rachel Yoon has also been focusing on the mental health challenges facing immigrants and the resources that are available. Welcome, you two. How are you been doing?
Thanks for having me.
I'm doing great.
That's amazing. Well, I'm very impressed with the work that you guys have done over the years through this program, and also Josh from throughout your career. I believe you started doing all this research work in 2016. Could you tell us a little bit about how you first started investigating this topic and why it's so important?
Yes, so I've been a criminal justice reporter in Chicago for about a decade now. And really this work came together about 3 years ago, starting with my transition to MindSite News, where I was taking on a new beat, criminal justice in that intersection of mental health. And one of the things we really wanted to focus on was what was happening at the time. There was this transition to 988, it was a transition from the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline to this 3-digit number that was happening across the world. And basically, I wanted to think about what this really meant from a local level. And since I've done so much work in Chicago, it just seems like the best place to start looking at this. So one of the things I was just wondering was why would this number be necessary? And if we don't have this number, what's happening in these situations? And one of the first things we kind of figured out was if people don't have this other option, they call the police. And just from being a criminal justice reporter, that seemed problematic. So what I wanted to do was get a grasp on how often people are calling the police during a mental health crisis, what they're calling the police for, and then how these situations end. And it was from there where I basically started a very large public records campaign to figure out where this data is and what we could find out.
And then, Rachel, could you explain us a little bit why are you interested on investigative journalism? What strikes about you about this topic?
Yeah, so I feel like I was always interested in journalism, but I wasn't really sure about what topics I wanted to cover until I came to Medill and started exploring. And I feel like with any kind of social justice reporting, I'm really passionate about it because a lot of journalism caters to audiences that often are not the communities that we're reporting about. And so with social justice reporting and reporting about criminal justice, I feel like we're trying to really help the communities that we're reporting about. And with the Medill Investigative Lab, which is the program that all the stories are coming out of, I thought that it was just a really important mission because I think journalism is a public service.
Amazing. Josh, you mentioned that you've been in MindSite News for quite a bit and then doing this transitional work. But you started, or you have lived through several major transitions in the city with different politics in regards to mental health and how police respond to these crises, right? So from the time of Rahm Emanuel to Lori Lightfoot to now Brandon Johnson, we have passed through closing clinics, reopening programs, but not really quite very welcome, right? Until and then now we have Brandon Johnson. So and then they're retaking that, and then we are into a Trump administration that are also attacking the funds for these resources, right? So. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, just thinking about my time, I feel like the mental health aspect is something that just kind of sits right underneath the surface. A lot of the times I was doing what I thought was criminal justice reporting, and it had this little spark of mental health that was just sitting under the surface that I wasn't really getting to, like we were mentioning, but, it was just kind of, oh, this is happening. Oh, there's a bunch of people who are unhoused living under a viaduct, which was one of the stories I did at DNA Info, Black Club Chicago now, where I was looking at this group of people who were unhoused and trying to figure out what do we do to help them? How can we help them? Do we just let them sit under a viaduct? That's not what the community wants, but also that's something that they seem to be willing to do. And then it became okay, well, where do we go if we can't go here? I go to the shelter and see that the shelters are closing down. So, I think kind of all of the politicians have always kind of made it, not necessarily around, but they have made mental health kind of a thing that we're going to do and we're going to help. And I think when we go from Rahm into Lori Lightfoot, we have someone who says they're willing to do all of these things that kind of treatment, not trauma work, kind of trying to make as their community idea of what mental health response should look like. But when it came down to actually implementing this, we went to kind of a privatized idea, which doesn't really help everyone or the mass amount of people who really need these kind of services. So I think it's always kind of a thing that people put on their radar but not necessarily follow through or have an easy way to follow through. I think that's one of the bigger things, having the fiscal money to actually help people get this treatment and not in a forced way.
In the data that you have been searching, it says that specifically this investigation or in partnership with My News and Medill, you guys have done research in different cities, right? And this investigation has searching 911 calls in response to that. Could you give me a little bit of that about what you guys have found?
Yeah, so when I was first doing this study, I started with Chicago. So I was looking at the data from Chicago, and I basically figured out that there was about 171,000 of these mental health related calls that police were responding to, and about a 2.5 year kind of timeline. And that adds up to about 193 calls a day. Now, most of these calls don't really end in force, but the ones that do end in force, we found about 147 incidents. In 2 out of 3, the force was used against a black person, usually a male, and it was the hardest amount of force, whether it was a baton or a taser. That's usually the force that black people are receiving. And just to be fair about this, I wanted to see, is Chicago an outlier, or is this something that's happening everywhere? So that's kind of where we went about from there. And I had this idea of let's take the 50 biggest cities and try to kind of compare them. And then when I was able to enroll the investigative class and trying to do this, I moved it up to 100 cities to make sure the students had enough places to kind of FOIA and get a good idea. But, the idea behind this was, can we get what are called 911 call logs here, which is a list of every phone call made to OEMC, our Office of Emergency Management and Communication, that had the mental-related calls, and then connect that data with police uses of force. So how often police come and use a baton or a taser or forcefully handcuff or take down somebody in these scenarios. So basically, once I had that data, I wanted to look elsewhere. And one of the big things we figured out is it wasn't really possible to do this in all of the big cities. A lot of the biggest cities are in California, and California doesn't have really good use of force data, or didn't have really good use of force data when we first started. But for the cities that we were able to, we consistently saw that black people, especially black men, were the people who received most of the force.
Some of these disparities between the population of Black people and the force that they used also were like very interesting to see. I read that there were 13 out of 16 cities where those disparities disappear, right? So the majority of these situations happen with Black people. So what surprised me a little bit about was Cincinnati.
Yeah, Cincinnati is the one that surprised us too. I think a lot of the police data we have to take with a grain of salt, because it does have kind of holes in its categorization of Hispanic people. It doesn't necessarily, sometimes it groups them all in as white. Sometimes there's a Black Hispanic, but it's kind of hard to separate. But Cincinnati was a place where all of the force incidents happened or occurred against white people. And that was surprising because that wasn't true in any other city. And then this was a 100%. And in any kind of data reporting, if you see 100%, you think this is probably a problem. But that's the data that we were given, and it was complete in this way. But it does make you question or make you want to go down to Cincinnati and see what's really happening, and just kind of understand what's happening here and what the data is really, really showing us, which takes a little bit more interviewing and being on the ground there.
In different cities, they have pilot programs or programs that they're being integrated in response to that, right? Defenders' Dreams in Miami, they have had situations where very close to their location have never been called, right, to respond, even if they were like a close distance. So what can we learn from these programs, and why are not there enough of them?
Well, the thing about it is there's becoming more and more of these programs. They're popping up. But also, as I was doing this, I realized that crisis response isn't something that just happened last year or the year before. It's kind of existed, especially if you were a behavioral health center or a mental health hospital. You have some kind of team like this that people can call in the scenario. But the people who actually know about this are the people who are kind of the frequent callers or the frequent users of the system. So those are people who kind of usually actually go towards this, but it's not enough. The same problem what they have with 988. So you need to advertise. You need people to know that this is an option. And a lot of times the first kind of crisis is when people call 911. They usually don't try to do it after, but it's usually that first kind of horrific, traumatic situation is happening because you don't know what to do. And I think that's really what the first Chicago story kind of explained. This scenario kind of popped up out of nowhere. It's the middle of the night. This grandmother comes and looks outside, and her grandson is not moving, not talking. Something's wrong. And it's just a panicky situation. And when we start going through the other places, it's a similar situation where something is happening very quickly. Somebody else sees this person talking on Facebook Live, and they think they're threatening. So that's how the police usually kind of get involved into the scenario. Those other places, Dream Defenders, you really have to advertise, guys, we're in the community. You have to go door to door and let them know. And then some of the scenarios, reading them actually as they're happening, they don't necessarily feel like, oh, we should call Dream Defenders or we should call in care. It's more of, this is happening right now. I don't know what to do in this scenario. I need immediate help. So I think they run against a lot of different kind of scenarios. And then funding is always kind of a big thing. Some of these places, they'll have a co-responding model that includes a police officer, and that's not necessarily what the community wants, but that'll be what is fiscally responsible, just in case anything happens, anything violent happens in the scenario, even though these people aren't prone to violence at all.
That leads me to the next part. We would like to talk about a little bit more about care, but those first response. When we called 988 or 311, when we don't want the police involved, sometimes you guys went into this research as well. So are they overwhelmed with phone calls? How long do we have to wait? Do those calls escalate when they are not attended?
So technically, 988 will say that they usually respond to these calls within 30 seconds. And that's something that they were able to improve. It was something I touched on, is that they had kind of these longer wait times in Illinois, in Chicago, basically because we didn't have a call center here in the area. But most of the time, the 988's calls, they believe those should be handled via the phone in a very harsh scenario. They have people, or they can connect you to someone to actually come out and do that. But that response would be a little bit slower than the police, and I think that's kind of why people end up in the police scenario. But also, there's all these kind of fears for people who have used kind of the hotline, that if they say something or if the person can't handle it, that they're just going to call the police. So that's one of the big fears that people have with this, along with just trying to make sure that their people that are responding actually have some sense of where you are. It's hard to build a nationwide system to handle all of these different areas, where someone who's in a rural area compared to Chicago, their stuff might not, the things and services that they want might not be as close. And if the person who's on the other line isn't familiar with this area, they don't understand that it might take you 2 buses or, a car drive that you can't make to get to some of these resources. So it becomes all these kind of different problems.
Rachel, could you explain us a little bit about the CARE crisis assistance response and engagement, what it is, and what are you exploring? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the CARE program was created in 2021 after, different community activists and advocates were pushing for that treatment, not trauma plan that we bring up. And, the city created this as like an alternate response for mental health. So at first they were sending both police and mental health clinicians and technicians. So it was a co-responder model. And then in 2024, after getting kind of some backlash from the original advocates, they decided to phase the police out of the co-responder model. So right now, CARE is supposed to be functioning and just sending technicians, EMT, etc. So my team has been looking at the CARE program, seeing, what's going on with the funding, because it's largely running on the COVID relief funds that a lot of cities got. And we've just been exploring the challenges that they've been facing, not only with the funding, but trying to balance like what the communities have been telling them, and also with like the staffing and etc.
Okay. So could you, I don't know if you can reveal that, but what are one of the challenges that that this program is facing?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, because a lot of the funds are from kind of the ARPA funding, which is the COVID relief funding, I guess what we're trying to figure out is where the rest of the funding will be coming from after that runs out. And another thing we're looking at is just like how the program has been kind of restructuring after the phasing out of the police, because in its inception, all of the agencies were working very closely together. So the CPD, the Chicago Fire Department, and then the Chicago Department of Public Health. These 3 departments were working in tandem for the CARE program. But after the phasing out, I was talking to some of the staff there, and they just told me that, it's been hard to restructure, trying to figure out, and even with like dispatching, for example. So when they get the call and when someone asks for care, they've never had a situation where where the Chicago Department of Public Health was dispatched. So just figuring out the logistical things like that.
Thank you for that. And so we don't find, or we don't see any solutions or any answers yet so that's going to be an ongoing project, I believe. So it's up and down with this investigation. You can see the bright, and then all of a sudden just comes down, and a true roller coaster. Now, You are also working with migrant communities. I kind of did an investigation in 2017 with mixed status families when we were trying to raise awareness throughout at least our Latino communities on mental health. We find out that was not a priority at the time, right? Because our families are here to work, and then it was try to understand younger generations and also the importance of physical health for our parents, right? And also mental health for them. So what are your areas of where you've been exploring?
Yeah, so I've specifically been looking for mental health resources for immigrants, especially under the current administration, and a lot of like the anxieties and fears about getting separated or getting deported even. So obviously, like, there are so many resources for the Latino community specifically. I've been talking with a lot of psychologists, clinicians who have a really like deep specialization in it. And what I've mostly been hearing is, a lot of times mental health is such a taboo topic in so many of our communities still. Like, I know even in my community, although I'm not Latino, like there's a lot of stigma associated with it, and it's not easy to get help for it. And it's not easy to know how to get help for it either. And so what a lot of different mental health services and providers have been doing specifically for immigrant communities is hosting these talks and safe spaces that don't necessarily look like what individual like Western therapy might look like, where you're just sitting in an office with someone that you just met, but rather kind of opening the space up and building like a community where it feels safe for everyone to talk about what they're going through, and not necessarily even labeling it as, this is like for your mental health, etc., but just allowing, just more free form and allowing people to talk about what they're going through.
I do believe if we speak up and then we can relate to each other's stories, right? There's a way of healing, or like we're not alone, and then of empowerment from each other's experiences. So that follows my next question. So we have the people of color community and the stigmas that mental health brings into that. We have seen the misunderstanding of our communities and the importance of opening up spaces with narratives that connect with us. What have you seen after all this research, and also, and I believe, or I want to believe that after 2020, we really kind of open a little bit more, and I really hope that these stigmas kind of decrease, right? Because we pass through this collective trauma, right? What can you see within your communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we do know is that our younger people are definitely more open to speaking about kind of their mental health in these scenarios. But, I've experienced more talking to doctors and specialists who do this, that is just talking about it in a way that's not mental health, where people don't have to have the name and title of that, but talking about the situations and things that are happening. I think that's really kind of more of how people are finding it helpful. But we do see more community groups that are like focused on Black mental health, or on trying to reach out to specific communities, Black men, to talk about their mental health. And I think that's kind of it's been a good way to get people kind of in their comfort zone to be, in separate space and think about this. That's really kind of the thing, is to kind of think about your mental health in a way, not where it's, this one day I had a sad thing happen to me and this is bad, but it's part of like your health. Like if you fall, you twist your ankle, you got to ice your ankle. So if things are happening, you're losing a job, you got to figure out how to keep your mental health and things kind of stable, and work on that kind of every day, the same way you would kind of rehabbing an ankle or a broken or a hurt shoulder or something.
Something that caught my attention is like, how can we reach out to these kind of care. I would call it care. One of your stories mentioned a father that lost his kid, and then the situation also escalated. So it hasn't a past or a past experience, so it was passing through that, and it was again misunderstood. And even for the parent or the care takers of this person, or even the household, right? How can in order to prevent these situations or like seek for the care that we need?
Yeah, I mean, I think this was one of those tough stories, but it does remind me of the people that I come into contact a lot when I'm talking about this, which is they might be even involved in the field, and they're involved in the field because they see some of these issues. That doesn't mean that they can necessarily save their family from the scenario that you're talking about, which ended up being a suicide by cop. But, his father was an alternative crisis response worker, and it really kind of brings into focus how people who are working with the scenario, how much they're really involved with it in their immediate community. And I think that that's one of the things that we need to talk more about, is that people are here, people are working in this because they've seen this. They've seen this problem that you're probably dealing with in some way, form, or fashion, and they're probably dealing with it too. So I think for me, one of the things is that since I've been doing this reporting, people talk to me about mental health issues. They talk to me about things that are going on with their family, what to do, what not to do. I'm not a therapist or something, but people feel more comfortable talking to me about these scenarios. And, I have a little bit of knowledge, so I can talk a little bit about it. But I think that that's really what's been kind of the big deal of working with these scenarios, is just hearing these stories make people say and think about it like, oh, I remember my cousin or my uncle or whoever, and I never really talked about it. What could I do in this scenario? What would work better than, just doing whatever comes to mind in this moment?
And remember, this is a Lumpen special. Today we have Northwestern University student Rachel Yoon. And we also have here in the studio Josh McGhee from MindSite News, Chicago Bureau Chief. And we are talking about police response to mental health crisis. We're going to have to take a short break, and we'll be right back. And we are back. You're listening to WLPN LP Chicago 105.5 FM Lumpen Radio. And we're back, and we're talking about police response and mental health situations, but we're also talking about Chicago landscape and how are we responding to this crisis and the resources that we have for our people of color. Rachel, your investigation on migrants, right? So right now we are seeing that in our Latino communities, we have our mixed status families, people that have been here for decades, years, but also now we are facing these new migrations, right? The new arrivals. So the situation becomes more extended, right? It's more complex, right? Because there are different needs, there are different experiences, coming from different backgrounds. So tell me more about what your findings are, how people are approaching, what services are they seeking, what services are around for this specific community.
Yeah, so like you said, I've been talking to both newly arrived migrants as well as people who are providing services for communities that have been here for a while. And one specific initiative that I've been kind of investigating and kind of trying to interview people about is the Reimagining Mental Health Initiative. And that initiative is kind of for the newly arrived migrants in shelters across Chicago. We know that, a few years ago, Texas started busing migrants to a lot of blue states across the U.S., and Chicago was one of them because we are a welcoming / sanctuary city. And so as the migrants were coming in, a lot of city and state leadership were concerned about their mental health because, being in a new country and not being able to speak the language is hard enough, but the trauma and the trials and tribulations that so many of these people had to go through just to get to the U.S. is also just it requires, a special culturally sensitive workforce to be able to help them. And so city and state leadership were kind of asking mental health specialists in Chicago, what can we do for the migrants? How can we support them while they're in the shelters? And so the initiative was created. And again, I was saying before that it's not enough to just put that individual therapy model where you're going in a room and just talking to someone. So a lot of the shelters started these things called charlas, and so it allowed people to kind of talk about their experiences with each other and with facilitators in the group. So a lot of the facilitators were actually volunteers and not actually specializing in clinical education or anything like that. A lot of them were volunteers from different community organizations. They were volunteers within the shelter staff. And so, they would just help facilitate these really tough conversations about, a lot of the lives that these people were leaving behind to start a new one here, and just being able to, again, create a safe space for everyone to talk through everything they've gone through.
That is a lot.
Yeah.
That is really a lot.
Yeah.
And there's many people that they're not living in shelters or never arrive into a shelter. Is this program or is this initiative also available aside of that? And how can they seek out this program?
Yeah. So I did talk to the creators of the program, notably Dr. Amy Elado and Dr. Rebecca Ford Paz, and they haven't actually expanded it yet, but obviously this kind of model is really important and could be applied to a lot of different communities. So they are actually working to, I guess, try to scale the accessibility. But from what I've been researching, there are still alternatives. So one center that I've been looking at is the Hanner Family Alliance, and this is an organization for Korean Americans in Chicago. And I'm not sure if the person that I talked to there knew about this initiative in the shelters, but they were actually doing something very similar with their own community, kind of bringing up very relevant topics. So, South Korea, a few weeks ago, there was a lot going on with the government and with the martial law that was declared. So they were able to get a group together and kind of talk about that, but also put in resources for, how to deal with anxiety, how to manage this kind of stress and anxiety that you may feel, how to cope with it, etc. So I think the really important part of these kinds of talks and community spaces is having that cultural aspect, but also being able to weave in what we view as traditional mental health strategies.
And then is part of your investigation also opens a conversation for accessibility. So not these kind of non-traditional groups sometimes comes from mutual aid groups or for volunteering, for organizations or non-for-profit organizations that really care. What happened with other services? How can we approach those services that they have? They're more specialized.
Yeah, so one thing that I've been relying on a lot for my own research is there is the Coalition for Immigrant Mental Health in Chicago, and they're a big organization. A lot of the officials that I've talked to are part of the organization, and they have something called the Mental Health Services Directory, in which they list a bunch of different places that immigrants can go to. And what I think is really important especially is that they have them listed under languages that they provide. So obviously, our immigrant communities, like, it's very hard to talk about mental health and things like that in our own languages. How are we expected to talk about that in English? So a lot of the places listed on this directory have all the languages and different languages that service providers can speak. And I think, it's really important, again, just emphasizing this like cultural salience. And also a lot of these services are able to cater to people who might not have the right insurance or documentation to be able to afford them at a different type of clinic. So there are some listed under free/no cost. There's some specifically for, in quotations, no ID required. So again, kind of really being able to get these resources out to people who need them without there being a barrier.
And part of this search, just curious about when there's like a little bridge in between the stereotype and in their priority list. So how these, have you just reached into these new arrivals or new migrants that they're coming here? I'm pretty sure they're passing through a lot of changes, from housing to finding a job. If they bring families, education for their kids, in what list of priorities mental health is?
Yeah, so like you said, those like housing, security, safety, those are a lot of the basic needs that, every person should have the right to. And it's not easy for immigrants to think about, what's going on with my mental health? Like, is everything okay with me? Because it's kind of like that survival instinct of, where am I going to get food? I need to provide food for my family. Where am I going to sleep tonight? Things like that. But I don't think that, mental health should be neglected, because even as you're trying to establish this new life for yourself and for your family, if you're having so much stress and anxiety about it, it becomes a detriment to yourself and your ability to function and to be able to carry out all these tasks. And also, something that I've been talking to a lot with the specialists is that's also a reason why a lot of mental health resources aren't accessible right now to immigrants, is because they're just worried about a lot of different things. And so I guess what I'm seeing is that just having the right outreach and showing people that this is a resource if you need it, and kind of, just showing that people are here and care about you and you can access it if you want. I think that just helps people come to them and get the services that they need.
I do also think that, some of the things you're talking about are how we really do treat mental health. If we're hungry, that's a cause for anxiety. That's a reason for depression. You did all of this traveling and now you're hungry. You don't have a place to live. You're sleeping on the floor. Like, that's what causes anxiety. Like, a lot of times we're thinking of, mental health crises as psychosis and things like that. But like at the bottom range, the most people who are going to be suffering are people who don't have a place to live or don't have something to eat. They have to worry about all of these things along with just surviving. So, even if you do have insurance or whatever and you're going to therapy, like, these are the things they're going to talk to you about. They're going to talk to you about your budget. They're going to talk to you about your being in debt. They're going to talk to you about the relationships that you don't have because you moved away or something like that. So, I do think part of it is not a listing of priorities, but you really can't handle your mental health if you're unhoused or you don't know where your next meal is. So, I do think by hitting some of these things, by providing these basic services, we are kind of helping people's mental health. We're getting them into a position where they can get more help for any of the other issues that could be bothering them.
That's true. And now, what's the current landscape in Chicago about public clinics?
That's something that Mayor Brandon Johnson has been pushing for. He opened, I believe, 2 official clinics in the last year and then another one at a library. So one of the things is trying to make these kind of other options appear without having a bunch of money for it. So I will have to give kudos just for the fact that, okay, here's an a place where we can reach people in this community on the west side that needs to have another option. Where can we put it? We put it in the library. At MindSite, we do see kind of these new and innovative ways where people are figuring out ways to reach people. We've done stories on basically dental offices that'll start giving mental health exams for younger people because they don't want to tell their parents or things like that. So just kind of creating these different places or these different kind of doors for people to go into to get that mental health things that they need. Also, just the fact that you can get Narcan and other things at our public libraries is another kind of way for you to help people with substance abuse, mental health issues at a location for free where you can always get that. That libraries are open every day, most of the days.
Yes. I always find public libraries as a safe space.
Yes, me too.
And yes. And in regards to police use of force, what's the status right now? How's the Treat No Trauma project going? Is there other initiatives that they're going to be applying in in the future?
It's kind of a mixed bag because we get the data and then that's weeks after these issues or incidents have happened. I haven't seen necessarily an incline in some of these scenarios, but as things kind of change, especially as what we see nationally, things that can cause more stress, there might be a lot more calls for mental health issues. If people lose money and there's a recession, these are all things that can kind of increase the needs for mental health services, and that might end in, if we don't already have the foundation of things we can go to, police might be called often. So it is going to be it's going to be a test of the system as we kind of battle all of these things. The summer coming, during the summer, that's when more students and kids are out of school. They also have more mental health issues during this time. So it will be kind of a test of all of these things we're looking at. And, that's where we want to be on the ground, ready with this reporting as we figure out what's happening in the next couple months and weeks.
Talking about the future and the future of the program, this program started in 2022. Your research started in 2016. Your reporting is about to launch soon. Where can we read more about all of this information and next steps? What's next in this process?
Yes, so the plan is all of the stories that we produce, this is going to be Chicago-based reporting on mental health. We'll be on MindSite News. We also will be partnering with local organizations. Right now, we're thinking Southside Weekly to create some kind of print version because we want to get this into as many hands as possible because we want people to know what mental health services exist, how they work, so that they can be prepared for whatever happens in life. I think that's the biggest part of this is we don't know when we're going to be face-to-face with one of these mental health issues, either for ourselves, for our neighbor, for our spouse, for our partner. So just knowing that these kind of things exist because it's almost inevitable that you're going to see somebody in crisis, whether it's someone on the streets or someone you know personally.
Rachel, what about you? Where is your reporting will be out? Do you have a date? And then is it going to be in Southside Weekly or will be in MindSite?
I think I'm going to try to pitch it to MindSite News, so I hope they accept it. And we are just kind of writing the story right now. I think it'll be done maybe by June. So, yeah, stay tuned for that.
Awesome. Any further information that you would like to give the audience in regards some resources that you have found, and yes, and then just remind people the investigations and the articles that they are already available throughout these times. It's MindSiteNews.org.
Yes, MindSiteNews.org. If we don't say it like that, we get sued, so let's make sure we do that. It's all good. But the stories of the Fateful Encounter series, they are available online. Got a great search function. I think one of the things is people don't necessarily know what they're going to get when they go to MindSite News. But if you have a question, you have some issues, some things about your life that you're not sure where you would find good news articles about this, we have that. There's tons of different things, aging parents, dealing with death after opioids, things like that. We have tons of information, great storytelling, and also policy information about the laws and things that kind of guard these.
I am really excited for all you all, like with this research. It's been such a beautiful and enlightening journey learning about the work that you've done throughout the times, and also big fan of Medill School, that they're always prioritizing mental health and involving new journalists and emerging journalists into this project, which is it's beautiful. We miss Carrie Linderson in this episode, but I'm going to give a big thank you to you both for being here in the studio and for sharing all this knowledge and for keeping tracking of this data, because I'm pretty sure it has been a lot. And then knowing that it's two of you here, but this a project has been led by several students also, and a lot of journalists, and your class, of course, that also involve like a large group. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've had, it's been a 3-year-long project. I've seen a lot of students come out with great stories like I could never predict, and they've launched themselves into good careers in journalism. That's been one of the great things to see, but also just kind of the work of putting a team together of people who want to do this journalism. I don't think mental health was ever on my career chart as something I really wanted to, but the students have really embraced it, and I think that that's kind of helpful and tells us where and what we need to be doing and thinking about for journalism in the future.
Absolutely. Well, thank you both for joining us today. Anything else that you would like to add? No?
Just thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you very
so
much. And remember, you were listening to a Lumpen special here at WLPN LP Chicago 105.5 FM, Lumpen Radio. And today we had a great conversation with Rachel Yoon from Northwestern University, investigative journalist student from the Medill Investigative Lab Chicago, and also Josh McGhee, part of this program, and MindSite News Chicago Bureau of Chief. Thank you very much for joining us, and see you next time. My name is Stephanie, and keep listening to Lumpen Radio.